All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a truly fascinating piece of history where the simple act of speaking your mother tongue became an act of ultimate defiance. We're going to explore how an attempt to force a single, unifying language onto a highly diverse population actually did the exact opposite and ultimately altered modern South Asian geopolitics forever.
So this brings us to a really incredible question. How did a dispute over words, literally just over vocabulary and script, lead to the birth of an entirely new nation? Well, we're going to trace that exact journey today. We'll move from a deeply flawed political problem, through grassroots agitation, all the way to a historic resistance. Section 1. A nation divided by design.
Okay, to really grasp the root of the problem here, you've got to picture the sheer physical reality of post-1947 Pakistan. We're talking about a newly created nation split into two entirely separate wings, West and East Pakistan, and they were separated by hundreds of miles of Indian territory. But the division wasn't just geographical. The source material highlights massive dissimilarities between the two wings. We're talking totally different ethnic makeups, traditions, social behaviors, economies, and, absolutely crucially, language.
And zooming in on that eastern wing, a unified cultural identity wasn't something they were searching for. It was already deeply entrenched. A staggering 98% of the population was Bengali. This intense ethnic and linguistic homogeneity meant they were incredibly united in their culture right from the start.
Section 2. The language disconnect.
3%. Just let that sink in for a second. 3%. This right here is where the core friction of our story kicks off. There was this glaring disconnect between everyday people and the political elite regarding what the voice of the new nation should actually sound like. Immediately after Pakistan was created, West Pakistani leaders tried to establish a lingua franca, a common language, to act as a political glue between the two wings. Professor Ziauddin Ahmad proposed Urdu as the sole state language. The major flaw in that plan: Urdu was the language of the Ashraf elite class, and it was natively spoken by a mere 3% of the entire population. To put that tiny 3% into stark perspective, let's look at the native languages back in 1951. While Urdu was spoken by this minuscule fraction, over half the nation, more than 50%, natively spoke Bangla, a language with a massive, incredibly rich literary tradition. Contrast that with Punjabi at roughly 28%. So the majority of the country spoke Bangla, yet the elite wanted to impose a language spoken by almost no one in the East.
Section 3. Sparking the resistance. Now, as you might guess, attempting to ignore the language of the majority did not go over well. The backlash was immediate. It was organized, and it moved fast. By September 1947, a cultural organization called Tamadan Majlis issued a pivotal pamphlet. By October, the first State Language Committee of Action was formed. In 1948, Dhirendranath Datta actually stood up in the Constituent Assembly and demanded the use of Bangla alongside English and Urdu. And by June 1949, all this political energy helped birth the Awami Muslim League, led by figures like Maulana Bashani and Sheikh Mujib. Actually, back in 1949, a writer named Said Mujtaba Ali predicted that Bengalis would never accept Urdu and that this whole thing would eventually lead to separation.
A specific pamphlet issued by Tamadan Majlis, edited by Professor Abul Qasim, really became the catalyst. And what's crucial to note here is the role of the youth organizations. They were pioneers in this. They weren't just seasoned politicians. They were students, thinkers, and young activists laying down the intellectual groundwork for a massive cultural defense.
But all that grassroots energy soon slammed right into an immovable force. After a whole period of strikes, Khwaja Nazimuddin had actually accepted an 8-point demand from the students. It looked like a win. But then, on March 19, 1948, Muhammad Ali Jinnah arrived in Dhaka, and he just unilaterally declared that Urdu would be the only state language, essentially voiding all those previous negotiations. The students protested immediately, right after his speech. The stage was absolutely set for a major collision.
Section 4. February 21st, 1952.
All right, this brings us to the tragic climax of The Explainer. It's devastating to see how quickly peaceful defiance escalated into tragedy. The government had clamped down, imposing Section 144 to completely ban public gatherings, but the students weren't backing down.
Step 1. Student leaders like Oli Ahad and Abdul Mateen actively voted to violate that order. Step 2. A huge, historic gathering took place right at the Dhaka Medical College entrance. Step 3. Police opened fire on the protesters, killing a student and an unknown boy immediately. And Step 4. In a pretty grim cover-up, the police secretly removed the bodies on the night of the 21st, burying them at the Azimpur graveyard. By February 22nd, there were 8 confirmed martyrs. Consider the sheer scale of this mass mobilization. We aren't talking about a small fringe group here. These were everyday students standing shoulder to shoulder in absolute defiance of state orders. They were armed, literally, only with their voices, insisting on the basic right to their mother tongue, and they were met with lethal force. And the state's use of violence? It completely backfired. The reaction to the police killings was instantaneous. On February 22nd and 23rd, schools and colleges all over the country erupted. Protest meetings, rallies, endless processions. The collective grief and anger just completely united the populace. What started as a local grievance had officially become a nationwide movement.
Section 5. Culture under continuous attack.
Now, you might think the tragedy would make the government reconsider, but the friction didn't stop. The state's aggression went way beyond breaking up a single protest. Even though Bangla was finally recognized as a state language in the 1966 Constitution, a systemic assault on Bengali culture just kept going. The government pushed for writing Bangla in Roman script. They flat-out banned the poems and songs of Rabindranath Tagore on Radio Pakistan, claiming they went against state values. They marginalized the Bangla New Year, Palo Baishakh, writing it off as a minority Hindu festival, and on a practical level, employment privileges were heavily skewed toward Urdu speakers. It was a sustained, calculated attack on their cultural and economic survival.
But here's the incredible part. Culture was exactly how the resistance survived. The spirit of the movement was immortalized through art. In 1952, Abdul Ghaffar Chowdhury wrote a deeply moving poem, which Altaf Mahmud later composed into the legendary Ekushergan in 1969. Tragically, Altaf Mahmud was brutally murdered as an intellectual during the Liberation War in 1971. But the art, the poetry, the songs laid down during the language movement, they cemented a unified Bengali nationalism that could not be broken.
So, all of this leaves us with a pretty profound question to consider. Does attempting to erase a culture only ensure its eventual triumph? The history we've explored today points to a massive, tragic irony. A political elite tried to force a 3% language onto the masses to forge a unified country, but instead, that very act of suppression awakened a fierce cultural nationalism,